So I think thank you everyone for your patience. Let's get going with this webinar. What really works in anti-piracy, attack vectors, and emerging technology. For those that don't know, I'm Dan Woolnough. I'm the Director of Content Protection Experts, and I'll be the moderator during this session. As we go through, just a little bit of housekeeping. All the participants will be on mute whilst we progress through the webinar. The webinar will be recorded and will be available for download. So if you want to share that with your colleagues or other people you may do after the event, as previously mentioned, there is a questions sort of chat tab. If you want to submit any questions, please do so with a sort of a topic heading and your question. We will collate those and have a section at the end to answer those. We'll do the best to answer all those questions. Any of those not addressed, we will follow up after the webinar. So let me just sort of kick off and talk about piracy. I mean, often people think that piracy is very complex. Often it can be, but it is also constantly changing. And it's sometimes perceived as an expensive to combat problem. However, if it's broken down into sort of sections, and if you've got a well thought through strategy that's well executed, you can make a significant difference to that. So today we've assembled a panel of industry leaders to discuss this topic. So let me introduce them to you. We have Klaus, who is the SVP of Security and Threat Defense at Verimatrix. James, who is the General Manager of Media and Entertainment at GeoComply. Marsha, who is the Director of Product Management and Anti-Piracy at Verimatrix. And Lee, who is the Content Protection Manager at In Media. So whilst we look at the problem space with the panel, there's a couple of things to set the scene. OTT, or over the top, seems to be where the majority of the market is going these days. So if we look back at traditional set-top boxes or CAS or conditional access satellite systems, these were typically hardware-based, often more challenging, but not impossible to hack. OTT systems tend to be very software heavy these days, and that's where a lot of the majority of the hacking is taking place. If you couple that with the rapid change to operating systems, capabilities, devices, and an ever-changing environment, it's quite challenging for an operator to maintain a service. It's challenging for them to keep their operational costs down. That often leads to extensive reuse in their service deliverables. Legal jurisdictions can differ significantly, and the process to implement change is often slow and complex. But if you compare that to pirates, they can operate globally, whilst the legal services have boundaries and territories to stick to. Also, not all pirates are the same. There's different levels of piracy. At the very top of the tree, there's what we tend to refer to as the commercial wholesale pirates, often well-funded and quite skilled. Further down the tree, you will have the retail pirates, generally commercially motivated, but often reselling or rebranding something from a commercial wholesale pirate. And then at the very low end of the tree, we often see hobby or enthusiast pirates. They're doing this for kudos or social media positioning. Their drivers are often the community that they live in or work in. And it's important to note that piracy is not a victimless crime. Pirates don't pay taxes, they don't put money back into the creative side or the service sector. And they often use commercial services to deliver their piracy. So a double whammy, so it's hitting the operator's costs as well. So to talk a bit more about this, I think we'll introduce Klaus. I'll ask Klaus what he sees as some of the problems in this area.
As you said, the industry is moving more and more into OTT, and with that, the pirates are also focusing more and more on exploiting OTT, where the whole technology around OTT has never been the stronghold against piracy. With all the content now moving to OTT, of course, the problem is going worse. So talking about the attack vectors, what are the usual attack vectors? If the basics are not in the operation, pirates usually exploit these basics or lack of basics first. Some operations don't have a DRM at all, so the content is in the clear. Some solutions have DRMs, but they do not use tokenization of the license servers or the content delivery networks. That's easy to exploit. Some of the solutions do not use encryption or authentication in order to transport these tokens or licenses, or they have weak lifetime limits of the tokens or a lack of device binding of the tokens that also can be easily exploited. A common mistake in the more sophisticated solution is often that there is no rate limiting when requesting tokens or licenses. That's also something that is frequently exploited. And of course, the classical HDMI ripping, screen ripping is still done. That's redistribution of the content. All the items that were listed before were more or less low-hanging fruits, and they can be easily addressed, or most of them can be easily addressed with a often inexpensive MDRM system. But if there is an MDRM system in place, does it mean that there is no additional attack vector anymore? And the answer is, of course, no. One huge problem is circumvention of regional restrictions. That's not only a problem in sports industries, but also in a world of premium content with regional release windows. That's a huge problem. And on the rise right now are attacks that combine stealing tokens with the existence of emulators for these DRM libraries, or the content keys are directly extracted from the DRM libraries and hand over or enable the pirates to distribute the keys for the content to their pirate customers. This allows an attack that is called CDN leeching, and that's basically the master pirates distributing links and control words to the pirate customers, and allowing the pirates customers to directly download the content from the legitimate distributors and costing the legitimate distributors a lot of money. So from that point of perspective, this is a perfect business model for the pirates. Dan?
Thanks, Klaus. So we've heard quite a bit about what the problem space is. It's probably interesting now to open up to the wider panel and ask, from my view, just going through the panel, I see Marcia at the top. Marcia, what's your experience of what we talked about from the problem space?
Well, talking about the problem space, I think it's also important to mention a couple of numbers, because obviously video is on the rise. Over 80% of all the traffic on the internet is from video. So normally we should say, oh, we are fine, we are rising, our market is rising, everything is good. But unfortunately, also piracy is rising. Recent research has shown that over 51% of sports fans admit that they use piracy platforms to watch their favorite sports on. We have seen that around 230 billion views and visits have been recorded in 2023 to piracy websites. Talking about losses, this is a bit more of a topic which is harder to put in exact figures, obviously, because no pirate goes to the tax authorities and reports their revenues, right? And they're not calculating for the exact losses they cause to their victims. Nevertheless, experts project a loss of a total of 113 billion US dollars by 2027 caused by piracy to the video industry. Only in the last year, there was reported a loss of 1.3 billion only in ad-based revenues. And in the EU, if you look at the EU market only, then the convicted pirates have done a damage of 1.1 billion in the past year. And as Klaus was mentioning, the CDN, all of the industry is agreeing that somewhere in between 30 to 50% of CDN costs we are spending today on piracy.
Those are quite some significant numbers. So I guess it puts it into perspective of how the market needs to react and safeguard some of what it's doing. Maybe Lee, from an operator and your perspective, how do you see things going?
I completely agree with Marsha that piracy is increasing. We noticed that through the last two biggest tournaments for the year to date over the summer, the Paris Olympics and the Euros. There was I think it was about 22% increase in piracy for the Euros. The complexities that those types of tournaments give us is the distribution models that they have across the globe. So some operators, it is pay to view, and others it is free to air, either all of it or some of it. And there are various different aspects that you can choose, inexpensive things, and even to a point, some of these tools are completely free that allow you to protect your content at a very basic level. And prevent or at least reduce the landscape for some of the pirate dynamics that that Dan mentioned. So those low-hanging fruit, those inexperienced and unskilled pirates who just want to distribute it for the fun of it. Ultimately, social media platforms offer some of those free tools. And some of the inexpensive tools that you can restrict your content to your territories are offered by the likes of James and GeoComply. So it's a very, as it's been mentioned, it's a very dynamic and progressive environment, and trying to keep up with it can be a challenge. But ultimately, cost shouldn't be the issue. I think some of the first steps that are needed give somebody the responsibility. Ultimately, somebody should have the responsibility of content protection and content security, and then from that, it can be that person's role to start that process of identifying what is their landscape internally and externally, and then looking at the tools, mechanisms, and services that you need to be able to not just protect your content, but contribute to the environment. There's no point in one platform being, super secure when there's leaks elsewhere. So it's got to be an industry and a joint process kind of moving forward, and working with partners like Verimatrix and GeoComply, are good steps to be able to do that.
Okay, very good. I mean, it's an interesting topic that, there's a nominated person within an organization that is acting as the go-to person. Ideally, they would be, a senior person able to set strategy within their organization. But it's interesting, I think, as you say, piracy knows no boundaries. A lot of stuff might be free in one territory and not in another. James, I guess that's a good cue to understand what you're seeing with regards to piracy and what we might be able to do, some of the basic steps and then some of the other steps.
Thanks. Yeah, I think going back to the point of this amazing amount of piracy that's taking place. I mean, we live in the golden age of content. There's never been more content available. There's never been more streaming services available. As a consumer, we're kind of spoiled for choice these days. But the crazy thing is, piracy is worse than it's ever been. So we kind of look at, why is that? And our business is really focused around where people are, understanding where somebody is and really who they are as to whether they can access content or not. And a massive piece of activity that we see across the internet with streaming services is people trying to either be somebody that they're not, or certainly be somewhere that they're not. And to your point, Dan, there are a lot of incentives as to why you might want to do that. content, and specifically sports content, have very different values depending on where in the world you are and where that piece of sport content is coming from. So as a sports fan, all you want to do is watch your favorite game, and you probably don't want to pay through the nose for it. You want to pay as little as you possibly can to watch that game. And amazingly, you know, in the age of content being everywhere and streaming services being everywhere, there are tons of tools out there for the casual pirate to be able to leverage in order to get access to, you know, a quick win of seeing their favorite match. And in our case, you know, that is the world of VPNs and proxies, which are now built into browsers, they're built into your devices. There are literally hundreds of them that we come across every day that are using all sorts of different IPs, from IPv4 ranges, IPv6 ranges, even home residential IPs that essentially give the consumer incredible power to jump around the world in fractions of a second and watch whatever they want to do whenever they want to watch it.
Now, I guess the interesting point there is they could be consuming a pirate service, or they could be consuming a legitimate service, but just paying a different rate to the territory to which they're in. So this, whilst we're not necessarily saying everybody's consuming pirates services, they might be degrading the profitability of a legitimate service in maybe, let's call it, a more developed world.
Exactly. We've kind of coined the phrase geopiracy. So it's not your classic take some content, steal it, and restream it everywhere. It's just accessing something for cheaper than you would otherwise, or potentially even free than you would otherwise. And that is against the terms of service of the streaming platform, and certainly of the rights owner who's, you know, funded the creation of that content in the first place. Maybe we can go to the next stage further, which I think we'll come to talk about probably shortly, which is actually how do people use these tools to you know, fake their location, to fake their identity, to then commit the pirate crime.
So maybe if we take a step back then and look at, you know, getting the basics right. I think from the perspective of the panelists, Lee, you are sort of the operator here. You are you're in control of a platform or multiple platforms. Are there any basics that we haven't mentioned so far that should be considered that people should be doing?
I mean, Klaus gave a very good overview of the expectations of a mature platform, and where everybody should be aiming to go for. And I think, you know, having a look at your environment, there is a number of documents out there to help everybody and anybody do this. Some associations have been very gracious in making these documents available, so it doesn't take much of a Google to look up standards for OTT streaming security, and you can find a checklist, and you can then, you know, do a self-assessment and go from there. But, you know, if your platform affords it, and you can get the budget, then, you know, I would definitely recommend having an external third party to come in and do a security audit. It's pointless looking at your landscape completely blind when you don't really know what your issues are, and you've got to start somewhere. So, you know, you are looking at a reasonable level of DRM. You are looking at tokenization, and then you're looking at strengthening your external environment to stop the issues and the theft of the content. And if you can protect your CDN and stop that leaching, then you are getting a long way to actually, one, reducing your costs, and secondly, protecting the assets that you've paid a lot of money for. And through that process, you can then start to kind of edge more and more towards a kind of a anti-piracy posture that is heading in the right direction of being a cost-neutral environment. It's difficult to achieve, I appreciate, but, you know, everybody has to have a goal somewhere.
So it's essentially know your platform, know what you're doing, and trying to make sure that the implementations you have are good. I mean, everybody's good, if not basic.
Yeah, everybody's got to start somewhere, and as I mentioned earlier, by having a person who is responsible for it, and then that person being given the ability to, explore their environment, and understand what they're dealing with. And then from that, you can set a very good focused strategy. You then can understand what your budget is going to be, and then you can start to interact with all the third parties that are available to help protect your content.
Okay, so I guess once you start understanding what's going on, that there's various aspects to an anti-piracy strategy. So there's technology, there's implementation, there's roadmap, but there's also a legal aspect, sort of the legal and takedown. How do you guys approach that?
Well, for me, certainly from BIN's point of view, and I'm going to reiterate myself again, it's about knowing what you're actually dealing with. So BIN has a very broad monitoring process. So we are actively searching and scouring the internet, and we also have on the ground focus as well. Very fortunate, we have a very good skill base of staff. We work very closely with the commercial teams, so we have a good connection with what's also going on the ground, as well as across the internet. So we are established and have a good understanding of what our piracy actually looks like. And then from that, you can then start to look at what your legal mechanisms are, making good use of the DMCA where it fits, and where hosting providers and social media platforms are responsive to that. You can use the evidence and the information that you have gathered through your monitoring process to lobby governments. You have the Digital Services Act across Europe that has a complaint and an investigation mechanism that you can invoke, as long as the organisation fits within the realms of the DSA. And finally, you can move on to subpoenas and suing. But again, if you don't know what you are looking for as an outcome, and you can't provide the evidence in the first instance, then all of these mechanisms just are completely pointless. So again, knowing your environment, know what you're dealing with, working with good organizations to help you with this. It can't be a one-person job. So having good vendors and good third parties to help you and support you with all of this is essential.
Okay, so a lot of knowing statements there. I know one of the sort of key things is about knowing your customer. Knowing more about your customer and what they're paying with, where their residency. James, I guess that sort of comes back into the geographic points of not just knowing more about your customer. What's your thoughts from your perspective on this one?
I mean, back in the day, they're still very prevalent even today. But with a set-top box in a home, a physical box and a physical location, it's pretty easy to know who's watching your content and where they're getting it from. And if you implement things like watermarking, then you can trace it back to that box and who owns the box. In the digital world, it's very different, and it's so easy, it's trivial to be able to spoof your location. I mean, who doesn't know somebody who uses a VPN if they don't use it themselves? And if you talk about a VPN with your friends and family, chances are everybody's going to know what they do. If you start talking about forensic watermarking and deep technical security parameters, people perhaps are not going to recognize that. But it just goes to show how prevalent these tools are and how much they're used. And the whole thing it comes back down to trying to hide who you are. So if you're going to sell a service to somebody and expect some payment in return, you want to know where your product's going, who's buying it, and have that relationship with them, especially if you're handing them something that's premium in the case of early window content or premium live sport match. So more needs to be done to recognize that it's very easy to spoof your identity online, and look for those signals where you can actually start to build some trust. So there are many techniques out there, not just looking at the location, but it might be looking at somebody's credit card information. So where is the card registered? What is the address? Does that tie back to where they say they're coming from? And then maybe you look at their IP address and say, well, is that in the right country? And then you say, okay, well, is it on a VPN? And then if you still end up with the wrong answers for the ones you're looking for, then maybe it's time to pull out some other signals which are readily available. You know, most people are consuming content now on either a mobile device or some device that has some form of location signal built into it, like a Wi-Fi antenna, for example, or even a Bluetooth antenna. You can use these signals to very accurately pinpoint where somebody is, whether it's down to the actual house, which is perfectly possible, or even, you know, to within a postcode. That's very doable these days. And with these small measures in place, suddenly you can start to trust who your viewer is once more, as we've done, you know, in this industry for decades before streaming came to be.
Okay, so we've sort of got a fair idea of the legal, some of the best practices, but I guess ultimately, you know, piracy is going to happen. People are going to find their ways around things, or they're going to try and circumvent this stuff. So we've got this challenge now of sort of trying to somewhat future-proof our solution against piracy. So we know we're going to get attacked if we've got premium content on there. Marcia, how would you suggest people consider that challenge?
Well, I think this is indeed a very relevant question, because if you want to invest into a content protection strategy, right, then you don't want to do constant patches and changes because of the fast pace of how the industry is changing and how the pirates are inventing new leaks, new hacks, how to attack in a brand new fashion. The basis is indeed to have something which will work not just today, but also tomorrow and next year, meaning a solution which is growing with you. And here I'm really also just want to stress what Lee just said is so important. It's really about having something where you have visibility. It's about transparency. On top of that, it's really important as well to understand like the 5 major steps which you have to take to have a really good protection going on. You need to start with really drawing everybody back to the legitimate applications only which you're using to consume the video. So excluding all the weird stuff, right? And once you have done that, it's essential to protect those applications against hacking attacks and any other things. To make sure that whatever you are doing to protect them is sustainable, you need to monitor and have full transparency on what is going on these apps, ideally back to the client, right? And as well, being capable of reacting to it. If you see that something's going on, really taking counteractions, shutting down the subscriptions, shutting down the applications, ideally, where it happens. That will also help to reduce the risk of going into these endless search of endless websites and trying to shut down all of these IPTV platform on hosting service. And last but not least, make sure that whatever you're doing, it needs to be renewable. Whenever you see that your protection has a breach, because we are not naive, we understand that pirates are also smart guys. They will break it eventually. So be prepared that it will be broken, see the moment, and then apply a new, absolutely different type of protection without changing the solution.
So I guess, I mean, one of the things that jumps to mind is we've got sort of web, iOS, Android type devices. There seems to be, or at least in my view, there seems to be a common misconception that I submit something to the App Store, or I submit my player to the Google Play Store, and as long as it passes their checks, I'm good. Is that perception correct, or is there more people should be doing with their apps before they just make them go public?
Depends which side of the fence you're on. If you're a pirate, then that's all you want. If you're a legitimate broadcaster and distributor, then yeah, you would you would like to think that some of the issues would get picked up in the App Store process. Some do. Certainly with iOS. Their processes are a little stricter, but I think we're all aware that actually it's not the case. You know, a lot of these are off-the-shelf products. You sling them onto the App Store, and away you go. And that's not going to work in terms of a profitable, legitimate organization. You have to do more.
Okay. I guess, Lee, you sort of jumped in there ahead of Marsha. Marsha.
No, but that he just answered the question. So what else can I add on that apart from it's so true in the end? It definitely depends a little bit on what type of devices you're using, because we all know that Android and browsers are more exposed than the iOS devices, but you cannot just rely on somebody else to take care of your content security realistically. And the threats are much wider than what we just named is the video piracy, because once the pirates have really broken into your video application, they take everything they find there. They take the credit card information of your users. They take really literally everything. So the damage is massive. And it's really smart to make sure that before you publish, right, that you have a close look at what you do. As Lee was saying, really do the security checkups. Have somebody who looks at it and make sure that whatever is going out there into the wild web is protected.
So not the wild west anymore, the wild web. Very good. Now it's interesting that we sort of talk a lot about the technology, but technology is one thing. I'm very keen on people addressing a strategy where technology is one of the pillars. We hear a lot about the legal position. You know, what is there legally we can do? There are various organisations that people can join. Lee, from you are predominantly a licensee of content at beIN. You are a significant player in your region, but you are, as we've said, you are but one player within that region, within the space. So what do you think it takes from what does it take to move the dial here on piracy? Is there legal avenues? Are there groups that people should consider participating in?
Yeah, the collaboration and the sharing of information where possible, and anti-competition laws aren't breached. Working with an association and sharing that information is key. If you're going to, it's a bit pointless being one single voice trying to lobby, a large government or a large organization or a large industry body. If you can get multiple organizations working together, and from beIN's point of view, we broadcast across multiple territories and jurisdictions, so we are part of several associations based in Asia, Europe, and the US. And we're very keen and very happy to share as much information as we possibly can. And where you find a unique attack vector, you can guarantee that will not be unique for to you for very long. And being able to discuss those in forums and webinars like this is again, I think is key. Forming collaborations, forming working groups to tackle large specific problems, I think is also very very helpful. We kind of speak and share information with James and with the guys at Verimatrix on a regular basis, and we hope that in the wider community that benefits everybody.
So I guess that's we touch on the sort of the wider community, that you're not standing alone, James. From by nature you are talking about geographical, or if not the world. I mean, how do you see things? I mean, we've already spoken about free to air being one of the challenges, that content may be free in one region but paid for in another. What are some of the other geographic challenges, and also what are some of the, if at all, what are some of the things that might help from a lobbying jurisdiction perspective?
So I think to give some context, of how we see our roles. So we have technology and we have customers out there using this technology, and we gather data. We have a lot of insights around what happens in terms of people committing one form of piracy or the other. And to put that in perspective, so we work with different streaming platforms, small, medium, and large, literally all over the planet. Between our top 4 streaming customers, we're probably servicing something like 800 million consumers. And then across and that's really focused on the VPN and proxy side of things. And then outside of that, looking at real detailed geolocation information and all of the kind of fraud or piracy that gets committed across those different services, we're looking at around 1 billion transactions every month. And out of those billion transactions, we see obviously a lot of very innocent and honest users transacting, being checked through GeoComply, but we're also seeing a lot of nefarious use. And that data and insights that we're able to build up is very useful for law enforcement. So, I wouldn't say it's every single day we get asked to do this, but more often than not, we're asked by various different bodies across the industry, whether they're rights owners or streaming platforms or independent bodies, to analyze a bunch of IP addresses and locations that have come up in investigations to see if we've got anything else that we can share. And wherever we possibly can, we'll give insights as to whether we've seen these IPs being used for malicious purposes, or indeed locations that they are associated with. And in some cases, we can pinpoint that down to an address. And then it's up to the law enforcement groups that are involved in those investigations to then decide to take action on them or not, based on whatever we can do to help. So I think very much to Lee's point, this is these issues affect everybody in the industry. We're all in it together. We're all trying to serve content. We're trying to create content, and we're trying to give consumers the best experience possible whilst we're faced with these criminals, some of them making millions of dollars, who are trying to disrupt the whole industry. So the best bet we have is groups like this, where we all have our own vested interests, but together we have a shared interest in trying to locate and take down these pirates.
And what about the sort of the working groups and the legal jurisdictions? How can they play a part in helping out here?
It's a very good question, and some of these VPN providers out there. I must caveat this by saying there are lots of very good VPN vendors out there, and there are lots of very legitimate reasons as to why you might want to use a VPN. But there are a good number of them who locate themselves in jurisdictions where they are, somewhat immune to law enforcement and information that you might want to gather on them, which becomes quite problematic. Which, again, kind of coming back to our point of view, it screams for something new. And we announced earlier this year with our customer DAZN, who've been using us for VPN blocking for some time, that they will now start looking at more advanced measures. Because if you want to be able to go after people in these different jurisdictions, you really need to know where they are. And depending on an IP address alone is just not enough these days. And we've already got a number of our streaming clients who are looking at how they can evolve their business, whether it's to have better geolocation or even just to know who their customer is, because they're also buying all these great services from people like Verimatrix here on the call and other vendors who do different pieces of the puzzle. But if they can't actually confirm that they know who the customer is in the first place, then to a certain extent, some of those efforts become watered down and are not as effective as they should be. So there has to be a way of making sure that we know who these users are, so that we can then take action if they're found to be committing some form of crime. Okay,
great, thanks. So if we then sort of start thinking about, say, a more enhanced solution, if you've got the basics right, if you've got some of the things we've already spoken about, there's more that can be done. We can't go through one webinar without talking about AI and the impacts of AI on our particular industry. So I think I'll throw it out to the panel about how they're seeing, what's the next evolution in both attack vectors and solutions.
Talking about AI, I don't really see that there is an immediate impact on piracy, with the exception that the whole attacks on the applications are already AI focused. Like if there is, for example, one contribution to app protection would be obfuscation, then de-obfuscation is something where AI at least has made some progresses. That is something in the attack side where we would see something going on. Also on the side of the watermarking, theoretically, I would see that AI with regards to image processing would be good to remove watermarks, fingerprints, or do collusion attacks on that side more easily. So there is something where I would see that AI plays a role. Would I say that that is today already very active? No, but that is for sure something that will come, because especially in media, I think AI is something that can be very well used. So speaking about watermarking, I think an enhancement to a solution at this point of time would be, and Lee has already mentioned a lot of things that can be done with low cost or even for free today. But the more sophisticated solution on the watermarking side is, of course, combining watermarking with a web crawling service that also then does some automatic takedown services, which are then more expensive, but also quite efficient. And in combination with the products that James has described, can be quite efficient. It would still not cover the extraction of the control words. There's still app protection needs to be in, but there we come. If we want to, we have to get the basics right. That's not super expensive. We have to enhance the protection with several components. Usually the enhancements are not that expensive that they would not be self-financing by the savings that they create, for example, by preventing CDN leaching.
Okay. So Lee, any additional thoughts there that you might have in this regard?
I mean, yeah, there's a kind of a conversation to be had. AI, machine learning, whatever you kind of want to call it, for good and for bad. I think as an industry, we do jump immediately to how AI and machine learning is going to hinder us and make our world a lot worse. But from BAIN's point of view, we are using machine learning to help us again kind of protect our OTT platforms. There's a number of organizations out there that are experimenting and playing with machine learning, and it can help. It can help speed up your processes. It can help identify where your leaks are, and yeah, it can be used as an asset in many circumstances, and being able to analyze a huge amount of data very quickly is perfect in that environment. And having data sets and the kind of the partnership with James again, allows the development of that machine learning in an anti-piracy world.
Okay, very good. So just for the participants on the webinar, if you've got any questions, feel free to put those in the chat window, and we can cover those at the end. So I guess what you're saying, Lee, is if we're looking at sort of AI and data, we need to know our customer well as well. So coming back to James's point of not just knowing where your customer is, but more about your customer. If we build a very effective solution that's able to identify a pirate source and then shut it down, we still have the challenge of being able to shut that pirate down and hoping that that pirate doesn't migrate to another freely available account that they can then spin up and or even have ready in the background. So I think all of these hygiene factors are really important, especially around proactive monitoring and getting a feel for what is actually happening on your service. James, any additional thoughts in this space?
I think just to build on what you've said there, I mean, we've just been doing some investigations on behalf of one of our customers. In this case, just using an IP address and some account activity data. So pretty basic data, really, and throwing it through our kind of engine of analysis that we have, which, by the way, obviously uses things like machine learning, which we've been using for many, many years, which helps us to crunch a lot of data very quickly and look for those patterns and anomalies that identify piracy. And the thing that has become very interesting for this particular customer we've been working with is that we can find these clusters of activity that are very, very unusual, tied to a specific location. So then naturally you'd find, okay, well, that account we're going to therefore block because they're doing something that they really shouldn't be doing. But then we find very, very similar activity starts to happen from the same location, but over a different account, over a different device. But because we've managed to tie that back to the location and know where that is, suddenly you can start to build up this huge piracy ring or fraud ring, and then see how they interact with all these different devices and different accounts. And then you start to see the links between different locations as well. So it might be that they have some other people working with them in different locations around the world or within the same city. You can start to pinpoint where they are. And that spider's web of information becomes incredibly powerful when you want to start taking action and just kill the problem exactly from where it is starting from and not disrupt everybody else. And that's always the big challenge that we hear from our customers, which is, false positives. What's the false positive rate? How am I not going to disrupt these honest users? Because nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to be in the press for having blocked somebody as they start to watch their favorite match on a Saturday night or whatever it might be. So, that's very key. And, we're all very well trained to make sure we're only going to disrupt those bad guys and keep the honest users as safe as we possibly can. And that whole concept of account sharing, account takeover has been around for a long time. And it's become famous in the last kind of 18 months by a couple of famous brands. But that activity has been happening, for at least as long as we've been in business, which is 13 years now. And being able to build up those clear maps is really important.
I mean, it's interesting because one of the go ahead, Marsha.
Well, I just wanted to add on what James just said, because I think that's really, when we are talking about enhanced solutions, that's what makes a solution in video enhanced, because disruption of user experience by adding more and more and more protection and security mechanisms is not acceptable. Different than in the banking or in the health industry, where you can just add additional authentications. I think that the understanding needs to be to have a solution which is really smoothly integrating without disrupting the user, because you don't want to scare them away. That's really one of the biggest trends which needs to be followed. And this can only be reached if you have like somebody, as Lee also was mentioning in the beginning, like closely watching, having a strategic approach to anti-piracy instead of just putting bits and pieces together and hoping it will work. Because even if you have like the greatest solution from all of the industry stars and you don't know how to use them, normally people just buy something like from online, which they find which is kind of cheapish, so it wouldn't be the industry star because they would advise you not to use it as such. But if you just put together even paid solutions and hope it will work, because now you have patched everything, it won't. And in the end, it will disrupt the experience your user has, and you will lose subscribers, you will lose ad revenues, and that's not what we want to have in the end, right?
I think that's a key point. The user experience should be paramount. There are a number of platforms that actually sort of champion that or have championed that over the years, that they don't want to disrupt the customer experience, but sometimes at the degradation of security. But it's interesting that we say we don't want to disrupt the genuine consumer, which is absolutely true, the genuine viewer. But one of the things I'm an advocate of from a strategy perspective is, as people consider rolling out new tools or new capabilities or new security enhancements, they don't always have to be rolled out in what I would call a blocking mode. So we know we discover you're the source of piracy. boom, we turn you off. Sometimes it's actually more beneficial to actually monitor those, build up what I would refer to as a pirate DNA. Look at the characteristics, as James has said. There's a lot of characteristics that a pirate or a pirate service or pirate accounts have in common. So look for those trends before you actually decide to do something. That would be a good recommendation. So I think as we're approaching sort of the end of the session, it would be good to get a view on people's closing thoughts about what their views are on combating piracy. So Klaus, I think I'll come back to you to get your view, and then sort of go round the panel.
Yeah, I think it became clear during the talk that my suggestion is really to have the basics in a good MDRM plus a reviewed MDRM solution, get as much as you can get by a cost-efficient solution. Add regional restrictions with a good tool, as well as application protection with a good tool, but with video-specific add-ons like the things that Marsha has mentioned, that we are able to kick out all the pirate scripts and not only protect the good applications, but also affect the bad applications. That is, for example, a video-specific part, and the other things that are important from my perspective is also mentioned the renewability. That is really something that needs to be in there. And again, so from my perspective, the benefit even of the part of the protection that costs gives more money than the tools would cost, because the CDN leeching alone is a lot of cost. If you reduce that, if you eliminate that, you win more money than you would pay for the enhanced piracy solutions.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on down, Lee, some closing thoughts from yourself.
Yeah, very similar to Klaus, really. Money shouldn't be the barrier. It's a basic anti-piracy strategy has to start with an actual person, and then working out from them, giving them the responsibility to help protect the content, and over a medium term, you may even find that actually the department starts to get very close to that cost neutral situation if you get the right strategy in place and work with the right vendors. And yeah, as I mentioned, I encourage everybody and anybody who broadcasts to use the social media free tools. They've been built in. They have been legislated. The DSA requires it. Use them. Otherwise, it was pointless having them in the legislation.
Okay, very good. Thank you. James.
I think, to build on again with Lee's point there, ultimately the risk with piracy comes down to the weakest link in the chain. And often, we'll have some high profile streaming platforms like BN who put a lot of effort and money into protecting the content, but there will be a lot of streaming platforms around the world who are much smaller, who may have the same rights, but are paying significantly less because their audience is supposedly a lot less. But in fact, they may be the ones that end up with the leakiest platforms and then hurts businesses like BN's. So, one of the things I would recommend, and I know we've got some rights owners on the call today, on the webinar today, is that actually, ask for help. If you're one of those small streaming platforms, you may not have huge budgets to be able to go and spend on creating all the best solutions out there, but we're all in this together. And I'm pretty sure I could say, maybe speaking on their behalf, but the rights owners, if a streaming platform goes and speaks to them and says, can you give us some advice? Can you help us with some housekeeping? Can you give us some best practices? I'm sure they'd be only too happy to send through a set of best practices and some guidelines, or even introduce them to other platforms in the industry who've been there and done it and had the issues and learned from them, and can help the rest of the industry to improve. And it's only once we all get to that level of robust security that the pirates' lives are going to become harder. And I can see, you know, one of the questions earlier from the audience was, you know, is piracy ever really going to go away, or is this battle just going to continue forevermore? And really, it will continue for as long as the pirates can make a quick buck. And right now, you know, it's as easy, if not easier, than it's ever been to put a camera in front of a screen, or just, you know, pull a piece of content, as Klaus was describing, straight from a CDN and bypass any form of DRM that's on there. So until we start locking up those doors, I'm afraid piracy is still going to be a big problem for all of us.
Yes, understood. And then finally, Marcia, yourself, your closing thoughts.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I started with scary figures, but I think that we all need to remember, and we all need to be totally aware that really piracy is huge. It needs to be fought, but let's not give up. There's no reason for despair, because similar to the hackers and the pirates gaining knowledge, inventing new attacks, we are also getting better. So they're also getting better solutions. And so definitely start doing it today. And in the end, we can only succeed together, because cooperation in the face of the size of the problem is key here. There should be no competition here. There should be no thoughts about who is doing what. It's really about working hand in hand together to combat the problem commonly. And then we will succeed for sure.
Thank you. Sounds good. So I think from my perspective, having heard all this and sort of acting as the moderator as well with my director's hat, CPE on, you know, there is help out there. People can often reach out to me. Most of the panel, in fact, all of the panel are attending IBC this year. So if you just take a look at the slides, there's our contact details. Feel free to sort of reach out to us and catch up on any of the topics you've heard, or indeed reach out after IBC if you want some help in a particular area. So I guess that's the end of the webinar today. I'd just like to thank the panel very much for their contributions and their efforts here, and let's hope we can move the needle on piracy, and look forward to seeing many of you over the weekend at IBC. Okay.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.